What's up, guys, and welcome back for another solo mining episode. This is episode 50. We're going to be talking about quite a bit in this episode while we're out here mining in this Mackinaw, just working on some Veldspar and things like that. But the main topic for this episode is just kind of I've gotten a lot of questions about why I play solo essentially in an MMO, and this is obviously not something that I just decided to do overnight. There was a lot of, I guess you could say, over the course of my gaming career, as it were, there were a lot of multiplayer games that I played that essentially kind of helped transition me to being more of a soloist. I do enjoy the social aspects of MMOs. That's why I tend to lean towards live service MMO games. But really, to kind of just summarize a lot of it, it's really about just kind of like being efficient and kind of just utilizing my own playtime, because I don't really play a whole lot per day. It's really hard for me to actually sit down and play for extended amounts of time. And even if I do play a lot of a certain game, I'm usually up and down from the computer quite a bit. I don't like sitting there for a long extended amount of time. Now, you can probably imagine that in situations where if you're doing a raid or if you're doing a fleet, you're kind of glued to a computer until there's a designated downtime that is there. And I'm not really, that kind of doesn't really jive with how I really operate. But really, and this is something I learned after doing solo in multiplayer games for many years, is if you can learn as a solo player to progress and to be kind of self-sufficient, it makes kind of the things you do with people a lot better. And we're talking about, a lot of the reasons why I kind of got this way is I used to play a lot of WoW many years ago. I would be what you consider a hardcore raider. We would raid on the reset days, but we would pretty much try to clear everything. We were raiding every night of the week, but a lot of it came down to just always having to wait on people. You'd be fully prepped, you'd be fully ready to go, and this goes for fleets in EVE or raids in WoW, or even wanting to run dungeons with groups in a Diablo type game. You're completely ready to go. You have everything you need to just chain this stuff with a group, but then you're always kind of waiting on one or just waiting on people. And it only took a couple of times of just kind of logging in and only having a certain amount of time to play and just waiting for a event to start, a group event to start, and just kind of burning that time that you had allocated to play to really kind of push me into the direction of just kind of playing solo for the most part, and viewing the multiplayer aspect of most MMOs as kind of just a added bonus if and when I kind of felt like doing those kind of things. And to kind of give a little more perspective on my experience in EVE Online for group play, and I will concede that I probably didn't have the best alliance corporation that really kind of helped I guess really show me the benefits or the positives of group play. I think my alliance was very unorganized and very inexperienced for the most part. But to kind of put this in perspective, we'd have people that would these pings for these fleets would be known for several days, so people had time to prepare their their ships, all their stuff, way ahead of time. But you have people that would come on and be like, okay, I only got a few hours to play, and we need to get this thing going. And but they'd be logged in well before ping, they'd be ready to go, and then we would literally sit there in station still waiting on people to get fits and people to get to location and stuff like that. It got to the point where before we could even undock for those roams or whatever, those people that had only a couple hours to play would have to literally log out before even actually doing anything. And I've been in that position before, and that sucks. Like if you look forward, all day at work, you're ready to get home and, play the game that you're into or whatever, and then you log in and you're excited to play with friends and kind of do something entertaining, and then you end up not accomplishing anything for that entire play session. That really sucks. And a lot of that is the reason why I play solo. But also, I think that Eve is also one of those games that you can succeed a lot in solo progression, and then if you decide to do like fleets or anything like that, then you're able to just do that stuff as well on the side. So it's a very important skill, and that's why I kind of focus my channel for solo content, because I think it's a very important skill to have as an Eve player, being able to go out there and mine your own ore and be successful and not have to rely on other people. And I think that's the biggest thing, is like whenever you have to rely on other people to progress or to be successful, then you are already handicapped to a certain degree. Because if there's anything I've learned about gaming in general and about multiplayer games and stuff like that, is even in the best cases and with the best intentions, people are just not really reliable. So I tend to try to take my progression and stuff into my own hands and treat everything else that I do with group play as just kind of like something that I'm doing just for the social aspect and not for progression. It doesn't really work in most games. Like WoW, if you want to have top level gear and all that stuff, you're basically forced to do the highest tier dungeons and stuff like that with groups. And so that kind of progression to that point, you're just locked into that kind of stuff. But like I think for Eve is like a lot of the group stuff is more or less just like a social thing, right? And obviously you can make a lot of cash doing like really, really good fleets, and like even with mining, and doing group mining, you can still be really, really successful. But then also you're kind of splitting those profits, based on like the group. And I kind of went into Eve as a solo player already. I was already kind of at that point. I knew it was an MMO. I knew it was something that like had a lot of group play, but I went in. I legitimately had like the first 2 weeks of Eve, I just was by myself. I didn't even look for a corporation. I wasn't interested in a corporation. I was just playing the game, seeing if it was a fit for me. And I was successful, right? Obviously, like I was learning at a lot slower rate because I had no context, because I had never played a game like Eve before. But I was still progressing. I was still getting there. The one reason I decided to get into a corporation was because I wanted to accelerate the learning so that I could, get a full perspective of the game. But even when I went into like a corporation and did a lot of group activity and group mining, I joined a mining corporation because that's what I ended up doing. I didn't start off as a miner. I started off doing like the missions at the beginning, the agent missions. So in the beginning, I was doing a lot of distribution. I was doing a lot of security. I was doing all those kind of things. But mining was something that, seemed to be really kind of up my alley for the most part. So I did, when I decided to go into a corporation, decided to do a mining corporation. Now, and this is where I realized that like Eve could be like both a solo experience and a multiplayer experience, because even though nobody in that corporation, it was basically a veteran corporation where everybody was on like disability or retired or something like that, so like everybody kind of had a good amount of time to play. But even with that being said, we only really mined as a group for maybe like 5 or so hours in the morning, from like a couple like an hour or two from reset up for like till like noon or so. So I realized that like even though I was in a corporation, I was learning a lot of things. It was really accelerated. I was still actually just most of the time being solo for the most part, which was fine because that allowed me to still do what I enjoyed, which was just kind of progressing solo. But then also for a small amount of time during the day, I was able to kind of socialize and mine with a group and just kind of learn a lot during those segments. And then that kind of continued for me for the first year or so. I mean, obviously we went from like being a high-sec corporation, and then we went, moved to like null-sec and started doing a lot of bigger mining operations, so alliance level operations. It was really the point at which I decided to go 100% solo in Eve was when the mining operations went to the alliance level. Now there was even more fingers in the cookie jar. There were situations where we would, be told that we had to go out and mine as an alliance, and then all of the ore would just go straight to the alliance. So like we weren't getting paid essentially for our time in buybacks or anything like that, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think that if you're putting your ships out there and you're putting them you're putting your ships at in risk of being lost, you should be paid something, even if it's like a flat rate. But as an alliance, saying, hey, everybody needs to get into a mining ship, go out there, mine for several hours, but then give everything to the alliance and nobody gets anything. I think that I told them at the time, I was like, well, what's going to happen here is you're going to have a lot of people show up because you're basically making it mandatory to stay in the alliance. So you're basically strong arming people to do that. But then essentially what's going to end up happening is every time you do an alliance off like this and you structure it that way, you're going to have less and less people show up for legitimate reasons, even if they're lying to you about the reasons why. And that did end up happening. Like subsequent mining ops after that, people will just stop showing up because they didn't want to give their time up for no payout, right? So there was a lot of conflict in like the even the corp level or even the alliance level, like moon mining ops and ice mining ops and stuff like that. And it's one thing to say, hey, we need fuel blocks for the structures, or we need moon goo to do to build like SRP ships, but task your corporation and your alliance to build those things and then buy that stuff from them. Don't just take everything at the raw value and leave them with nothing, right? Because it's like even at that point, and that is something that was happening as well too, is like these corporations, or these members of these corporations and these alliances, like we all had the blueprints fully researched that we owned, but then we were expected to use that stuff for free. And that's really kind of, not to get too much into that, but that's actually the point at which I decided to just kind of get away from group play. And there was a lot more drama that really kind of tipped that over, that involved a high-sec war that we were involved in, and we were essentially being told that we were going to get paid if we showed up for a certain amount of timers, and then nobody ended up getting paid at all for the cores that we were looting and everything. So it's like all of that kind of like just caused me to just shift over to just not wanting to be part of a group play, like structured group play in EVE, and just went straight to like solo. I still would go out with people to do like structure bashes for fun. Like people, I kind of got to the point where people knew if I was going to show up, it was because I wanted to just hang out. But I think it would take a lot for me now to really go out and do like a corporation or an alliance level event that wasn't just basically just a social thing for me. And that kind of I mean, I have a lot of offers and stuff to like join people's corporations or alliances and stuff like that to do things, but I know that like even if my corporation got invited to an alliance somewhere in Null, there would be some sort of strings attached, because that's just how that kind of situation works out there. So that's one of the big reasons why I literally just run my own corporation that only I'm in, and that way I'm not on the hook for any required kind of gameplay. And I would say I probably am more successful in terms of like ISK income and enjoyment, success and enjoyment in EVE, being a solo player, than I ever was when I was with a corporation or alliance. And I realized, like I said earlier, like I will fully concede that the corporation and the corporations and the alliance that I was associated with were probably just super toxic, and that they were probably the lowest common denominator in terms of like what multiplayer really is in this game. So I think at a certain point I might try to find a decent group on just a specialized character. I'm not going to move any of my current characters into an alliance or corporation, but if I do decide to like kind of dip my toe in the water for the multiplayer again in EVE, I'll probably just take a specialized character somewhere. That way, if the drama gets too crazy, I haven't really disrupted any of my my solo operations. And I think that's really important, very, very important actually, in this game. Is like, once you kind of figure out your I don't know, your operations on how you like to make ISK, whether it be like doing manufacturing or doing certain types of mining in certain areas of space. Once you kind of figure out your like daily routine, it's really hard to deviate from it, because you have that kind of locked in. Because especially in Eve, when you have to basically like train into ships to be efficient in certain things that you're doing, if you're really like kind of gotten your routine figured out, and then some group or corporation or whatever that you're in, they're like, hey, you need to train into like this ship with this type of weapon system and be here and do this, right? It's like, well, you're in the middle of training something that actually affects your day-to-day income. Now you're expected to take that training time and put it towards something that is not going to profit you. And that was also part of like the whole falling out I had with multiplayer and Eve, right? I was actively training skills. I was paying for my own Omega. That Omega I was using to train skills that actually affected how I personally made ISK and generated funds to fuel the fun in the game. I was told to DQ all that stuff and train into a certain ship for a certain either whether it be like defense fleet or some sort of war doctrine. When I did all of that, I put all of my personal training on hold, did all that alliance level training only to just not get paid for those actions, right? And that was the thing, is it's like I had a really good discussion, heated discussion, I guess, with the powers that be at that time. I was like, look, unless you're going to pay for my Omega, you're not going to dictate how I train my character with that time, right? And I don't think anybody should, be allowed, unless they're paying your bill. Then at that point, they might as well just make an alt and do it in multi-box and do it themselves, right? And like, you're never like, if you're a willing participant in roams and fleets and stuff like that, and you want to contribute to that kind of gameplay, then it's a moot point, right? But you're talking about like, in the situation I was in, we came into the Alliance as the backbone of industry for that situation. So we weren't brought in as defense people. We weren't brought in as PvP roamers. We were literally brought in explicitly to mine and to build and to produce things that supported that side for a cost. And then after a certain time, they were like trying to basically convert what we came in as into something entirely different. It's like, oh, I want to take all of our industrialists now, all of our miners, and I want to turn them into like drunk PvP roam people. It's like, that's not going to work. That's never going to work, because you didn't bring us in as that. So you can't just like kind of change the situation there. So that's but I don't want this to seem too ranty, but I wanted to explain a lot. I mean, I have a lot of people that ask me, it's like, you're doing all this solo content for a game that's clearly made for multiplayer enjoyment. And while that's true, CCP's major focus in this game is PvP, because destruction is what fuels Plex sales. It's what fuels Omega subscriptions. And to be efficient in any aspect in this game requires Omega, because you have to have those Omega locked modules and ships in order to do that stuff. So even though the main focus of this game is multiplayer, there are still hundreds of people that are wildly successful in the solo aspect. So I think that's just like it's a paradigm shift or something. Like, it's if you're brought in to EU as from a friend who's like, hey, get this game, and we're gonna like get you a ship, and you can come out here and like do these fleets with me and do all this PvP. If that's how you started playing Eve, and that's probably all you know. That's like your initial impression. That's your initial kind of expectancy of the game. But it's like, for me, And for a lot of people I know, they started playing the game and they weren't referred, they weren't brought in. And you know, when you don't have a friend that actually brings you in to do X, Y, and Z, then you kind of just start the game like the way the game is kind of structured. Especially back then, it's kind of, you kind of just start doing your own thing. Like you do missions and you're doing all this stuff by yourself and everything. Because back then when I played, there wasn't like a fleet finder, there wasn't any of this crazy stuff. Like you had to literally like know to go find a corporation and then do the roams and all that stuff. So for me, I think Eve will always be a solo game for me with just other people kind of in the way. But I do like that though, because it's like you can play solo and still trade and still sell and still produce and do things for people that are in the game as well. That's what makes it different than just a strictly multiplayer game and everything. So hopefully that's like the best description of why I play solo in a multiplayer game. But yeah, we're gonna keep mining here in this Mackinaw. I'm gonna talk a little bit about FanFest and all that stuff, but I just really kind of wanted to address like that because I think it's a big hookup for a lot of people. It's like why are you why do you play solo? It is a weird thing to think about too. If you really kind of sit back, you're like, yeah, you know, you're playing this multiplayer game and you're just like, nope, no groups. So I was at the very end of like my playtime. I really kind of got to the end of where I was like playing WoW. Like even raids I would do by myself. That's when I was doing like a lot of multi-boxing and stuff, which probably further further helped my enjoyment for solo, because like solo doesn't really necessarily mean just like one character. For me, it could mean like just me. You know, I could have just like a ton of accounts doing a thing. So that's kind of how I justify it. So we have FanFest now starting on Friday. That is pretty exciting. I'm actually really looking forward to the keynote there. I don't think that we're going to see a lot of industry changes or new features or announcements. I think it's going to be mainly just kind of about Epiphany, about Java, about, you know, Deathless and stuff like that. I think it's going to be just kind of that's going to be kind of the main focus of that expansion. I think it's still exciting though I think it's always exciting to see like new features come out, especially at the convention level or like on a big event like that. I do really, it really does suck that I don't actually get to go to FanFest. I think that would be something that I would love to experience, and I'm really hoping that like, hopefully next year I can be able to actually make it out there and at least experience the FanFest at least once. I think that would be a tremendous experience for me. I've only ever really traveled in terms of gaming competitions once in my life, and never really I used to play competitively Magic the Gathering, so I actually did play in pretty big tournaments for that you know had me, you know, flying out of state to do really big tournaments, which it was always fun and exciting. And it's one of those things that's like, even at a competitive level event like that, going out there, you know, buying a plane ticket, going out, playing in a tournament, even when you don't do well or place or something like that, it's still like an experience. And I've never really gotten to like experience that. So I've never been to like a BlizzCon or anything like that. And I think that, you know, I at one point my goal was to like go to a BlizzCon. That was kind of like one of my biggest things that I wanted to accomplish. But I think in more recent years, going to a BlizzCon is probably not something that I would enjoy at all. So FanFest looks pretty good now. I think it's just because like my kind of gaming taste have kind of shifted in recent years and things. I went from like playing strictly like AARPGs like Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 and stuff like that. Even like Fallout games to really just kind of being like a space game person with like Star Citizen, Starfield, Eve. And so like normally when I'm looking for like new interesting games to play, I usually lean towards space themed games now. which I always find kind of hilarious. Seeing how that taste or that interest in games have changed for me so drastically. Um, and like after, even like No Man's Sky, like I bought No Man's Sky like when it came out many years ago, and like didn't really touch it. But then when I like really when Eve caused me to like make that transition over to like space games, that ended up going back and playing No Man's Sky and got a lot more enjoyment out of it. Also, they just added a crap ton to that game. Pretty much every space game that I have played up to this point, I've enjoyed. Star Citizen has fallen off for me quite a bit, because when I first started playing Star Citizen, they were just kind of like, the servers were stable-ish. New features were coming out quite a bit, and now it's just like patch after patch. It's like the stuff they're adding is like just not interesting. It's like, you have so many things in Star Citizen that are broken, but we're adding rivers, right? So it's one of those, and I have I wouldn't say quite a bit. I probably have like a couple $100 invested in Star Citizen, but it's like, when the game really kind of starts to round out a little bit, then I'll be interested to go back and check it out, because they'd have to add quite a bit to a patch for me to get any length of game play out of it, because when I kind of like find a new game, I end up just kind of going crazy with it. So just within like a month or so, or a month or two of playing Star Citizen initially, I had done pretty much everything that was in the game at the time, and got to the point where there's like, well, there's nothing else for me to do. I could keep grinding credits, but they're just going to reset it with the patch. So it's like, I would just at that point I started this whole like routine of like, oh well, I'll log in for the patch, see what's new, see what's crazy, and then step away until they add more changes. That's kind of how that ended up going for me. And then of course more recently with Starfield, I completely, like, no pun intended, but spaced about the release of that game, but I ended up playing it when it came out for early access. But I ended up completing my first playthrough within like 4 days and some change playtime, like saved game playtime. I'm still kind of messing around with it a little bit on the New Game Plus, but for the most part, it's like, for me, it's like credits are so easy to come by in that game. Good weapons are kind of hard to come by, but it's like, you do get a good amount of experience when you kind of like go to the Unity and kind of reset your game back. But it's like, it's really not really worth it. Like once you start finding like really good ships and you find really good gear and really good weapons, it's almost better just to like grind out, stay away from, you go through Unity like once, and then just kind of like run that new game until you have like all the good stuff. And like that's still kind of like a type of game that I like to play. I didn't really ever play Skyrim, but I played a lot of like Fallout 3, Fallout 4, Fallout 76. So Starfield is really kind of definitely in my wheelhouse. But also when I'm playing that game, I'm looking at it through the lens of like, well, if this was actually like a live service multiplayer game, I think it would be a lot more engaging. The ability to actually farm things and trade with people, or like in Fallout 76, where people could have like vendors at their outposts for their found gear, so you could go to these planets and find these other player outposts and like buy things from them and to help with your progression. I think there's a lot of potential there. Do I think that Starfield will stay single player? No. I think that it's inevitable, but it will end up becoming, even if it's like the level of like multiplayer that like Fallout 76 is, where there's like very few people on a server, but there's still other people there. I think there'll be definitely some sort of multiplayer that gets added into that. But enough of that stuff. That's why I was playing a lot of that when it first came out, so I didn't really do a whole lot of Eve content there. But moving forward with Eve, and now that I've kind of experienced that game, I'm kind of back to the grind and doing the whole like I talked about in the last episode, doing like the 1 trillion net worth goal for Eve, and that's basically my overall goal completely for that. And I want to kind of speak more on that goal too. There's a lot of ways that I'm actually going to get there in terms of just like daily income. I'm not necessarily giving myself a certain amount of ES that I need to earn per month, or giving myself a 10-month or 12-month like time limit. I'm really not giving myself a time limit at all, because I really just want to get there when I get there, because I don't want to burn myself out. But right now, a lot of the ways that I'm actually kind of progressing that is through like project discovery while I'm mining, doing the mining like I normally do and like I'm doing now, and then PI in nullsec, and doing some ratting in nullsec as well. And then eventually, I think my character that's in nullsec right now, she's right now training into Marauder. Like, she's going to be basically just like another golem pilot, kind of like my main is, because you can make a lot of ISK doing DED sites and getting the overseer caches and stuff in nullsec. So we're talking like you can make billions and billions and billions a day doing that stuff. And she's already max scanning, so she can already do like max relic sites. So a lot of her value too is she's pulling a lot of loot out of those rare, or not those rare, but those relic sites. And eventually all that stuff will just make it back to the main. The main is going to be the one character we're going to be judging the net worth on. So as we kind of like start getting a lot of ore stacked up, all that ore will get sent over to the main. So that's going to be the main tracking for us right now. A little bit slow to start. I mean, we really haven't added like any significant. We've added like a couple of billion, I want to say, in the past day or so to that tally. So we'll probably in the next week or so be at a nice solid 150 billion net worth or so. But even if I can like move that dial 10 billion a month, I'm fine with that. Even like, I don't care if it takes me 2 years. I think really the idea is like solo play, doing majority mining, and getting to 1 trillion is something that I feel like a really big accomplishment, and something that I just really want to strive for. And in terms of like how I'm actually doing it, all that's going to be conveyed not just in this series, but in the solo nullsec series, or even in the other series that I start that's Eve related. Anything that I'm really doing in Eve to make ISK is all going to be pushing that goal. So I'm really excited to kind of get that kind of really popping. I think probably initially I will give myself some sort of like ISK per month goal, but I don't really want to drill it down too much. I don't want to be like, I need to make this much per hour or this much per day, because some days are better than others in Eve, as we all know. Some days you find really good relic sites, some days you don't. So we'll see how it goes. I know that if like I really go back to doing like DED sites and stuff like that in nullsec, I could do like probably 50 or 60 billion a month, and that's pretty chill. That's only playing for like a couple hours a day. If I did more than that, if I actually traveled out more, and that's like playing like a couple hours a day and only like really ratting in a couple of systems. But if I actually like kind of push out the amount of systems that I'm ratting and kind of extend the amount of time I'm playing, you could easily do 100+ billion a month, which means that I could make my goal in like 10 months. But I feel like if I did that, I feel like if I push myself that far, by the end of it, I would be so burnt out that it wouldn't really be worth it, right? Because then I wouldn't want to like turn around and like spin that trill doing something crazy. I would just be like, get there and then just be so mentally burnt out that I would not even want to like turn it on anymore. So that's what I'm trying to avoid. I'm trying to avoid like insane burnout, because even if I could do it in 10 months at that rate, who knows, I might make it a month and then be like, I need to step away for a month. So it would probably still end up being like 20 months if I'm taking a hiatus every 30 days. So I'm really just trying to like lock in a consistent, sustainable kind of routine. And right now it's just, I'm really just kind of still enjoying the whole like solo mining and high sec thing, and we're just going to keep kind of going down that path and see where it leads. And that's going to be kind of like the backbone of this series. And like one of the big reasons why I wanted to have this series be more of like a podcast style situation, so that I can talk about the things that I'm doing in Eve, and the backdrop being like the mining that I'm doing and all that good stuff. But yeah, looking forward to it. All right, now the last thing I want to kind of cover in this episode is, I've got a lot of questions about why I don't do certain types of mining, right? whether it be like Poshman, like, why don't you go do Poshman mining, or why don't you go do rare ore mining, or why don't you go do nullsec or lowsec mining? The list goes on. A lot of those comments I would love to, reply and be like, we've done that in this series. There is literally probably multiple episodes of us doing all those different kinds of mining. But I want to kind of further kind of explain and define why I primarily do high sec mining. And that's because I tend to do just what I like to call volume mining. So even if I can go into like low sec and mine a certain amount of ore and take a certain amount of risk and come back with a certain amount of ISK, instead of like worrying about all those things that are kind of involved in doing that successfully and not losing ISK with the loss of a ship or whatever, I tend to just want to go for volume. Even if it's a lower ISK per M3, I tend to just go for volume. So that's why a lot of what you've seen in this series is just me in a high-sec system, in a Mackinaw, and I'm just mining, Veldspar, Plag, all that stuff, and I'm just kind of like going to a station, and I'm just compressing it, and then I'm just doing a high amount of volume. Because it definitely, it allows me to know that like that Mackinaw, I don't have to keep repurchasing if something crazy happens. Which I've already illustrated kind of with the amount of mining we've done since we purchased that Mackinaw. We've been using this Mackinaw for like several months now. So that's really the big reason why. And also just downtime. So focus on volume. So it's like I just want to be able to like go out there and just mine a crazy amount and have a sustainable income, but also to avoid downtime. And I think a lot of this comes. A lot of this stuff kind of comes out too when people talk about like gas mining versus actual regular mining. Obviously, gas mining's value and ISK per minute is a lot higher, but you have a lot of downtime there when you have to like look for sites or do all that travel or whatever. And even though like the value of certain gas or certain ore can say one thing, and in practice it's not necessarily the same. And a lot of what I try to do is I try to have if I'm going to play for like 2 hours, okay, I want to have those mining lasers on for as much of those 2 hours as possible. Because if I go out there for 2 hours and say I'm going to mine high sec ore, chances are I'm going to make more ISK than if I say I'm going to go out and do rare ore mining for 2 hours. Because I might spend the vast majority of that 120 minutes looking for those anomalies, and if I find one, then it's probably going to be competition. I'm not going to get really what I want, the high value stuff. So it's easier for me to just run the stuff that's plentiful, and that also allows me to do like type B crystals. And that's really just kind of like the one thing I try to like get people to understand the best that I can is what looks good on paper isn't always the same in practice. And that's just something that I've learned personally. Like obviously like I can go out there and procure in nullsec target Mercoxis, but after a few hours when all the Mercoxis in the systems that I have mining rights in or whatever the case may be, when all that Mercoxis is gone, then that's it. But if like high sec, there's just plenty of Veldspar, Plag, all that stuff all over the place. So it's like you can just literally mine a lot more volume and end up making more down the road, or more per hour for the most part. It's extremely situational too. I know a lot of people are not going to agree with that. They're like, well, if you go spend 2 hours in low sec or null sec, and you can make this amount with this type of ship. But also it's like I'm more of like a big picture kind of a situation. It's like I want to buy one, and especially being like a solo miner, and with the focus on like taking one Mackinaw and just making as much ISK as possible. It's like I want to buy that Mackinaw, and I want to just go out there and just mine as much volume as possible, and pay for that ship 10, 100, or 1,000 times over, and just control the risk, right? Because a lot of what allows you to become, I guess, space rich, as people like to say, or like allows you to become successful, and allows you to have a lot of ISK and stuff like that available to do other things in the game. You have to kind of control how much you're spending, and also your losses. if you're constantly going out there and mining that good high value ore in those high risk areas, and you're, maybe not consistently, but you're at least losing ships, or you have downtime because fleets come into system and you get off grid, any sort of downtime where your lasers aren't on, or if you have to replace a ship, that all cuts into your bottom line. And that's where I like to control. Like, it's not necessarily like how much the ore is worth in my hold, but it's like if I'm not buying a Mackinaw every month or every week or whatever the case may be, then I'm gonna do a lot better on my own growth in terms of how much ISK is in the wallet or how much ore is in the ore hold. So if you're watching this series, I do highly recommend you start from like episode 1, and kind of like see all the activities that we've done up to this point, because this is crazy. Like episode 50, probably one of the longest series I've ever run on YouTube. We've done a lot in this series, but like moving forward, we're definitely just pushing the volume thing. And I love the Mackinaw. It does really great. And like we might end up breaking out like the Orca or the Porpoise to like really kind of do boosted days as well. But really, the going out doing multiple trips in a Mackinaw every day is really still really enjoyable for me. So I want to thank you guys for watching the video. I want to thank you guys for like watching this series and showing your support and all that stuff. We made it to episode 50. Hopefully we got 50 more ahead of us and everything. I'm always open to suggestions and questions, and we'll try to do a segment every few episodes or so where I answer more direct questions from you guys. That seems to be something that I did that in like episode 48 or so. So that's something I want to kind of get going into, like, and also just like I said, suggestions. If you want to see me go out in like a procure or like in a battle cruiser and do some mining, whatever, I'm open to whatever, because at the end of the day, it's like it's an experience, and it's all about repetition and those crazy goals of right now becoming a trillionaire as a solo miner. Very, very difficult, but also going to be very rewarding when we get there. But thank you for watching. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. That stuff helps a ton. If you want to support the channel, you can become a channel membership and get emotes and all that crazy stuff like that that's tied to that, and that really helps with furthering content and stuff on the channel. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.